Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. Storycraft where I tell you guys a story and I do a craft. And yeah, today I am finally breaking the seal on this bargain bead box that I got in December, and just making a bunch of stuff. So we're doing a big beady blitz, and I'm going to tell you guys a story. And today I'm going to tell you a story about a snake, because I told you guys I'm going to tell you guys some snake stories. So we're going to talk about the tale of the white snake, or the tale of Bai Suzhen. And I'm already going to apologize way in advance. I have looked up a lot of pronunciations and listened to them a million times. I am going to butcher these names. I make no promises. I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to butcher these names. But I wanted to tell you guys this story because it is one of my favorite stories. It's my favorite snake story, for sure. Every time I think about it, like a fairy tale, folk tale, bit of mythology that has to do with snakes, this is the first one I think of, and I had to do a little bit of research because this story is old. It's actually one of the 4 great folk tales of China, and maybe at one point I'll get to all the rest of them, but some of them are very long. But every subsequent dynasty has like added or changed some part of the story in some way. So I had to sort of dig around a little bit to find the version that like I most remember and rings the most true to what I remember, without being super conflicting, but also like I didn't want to leave out certain elements and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of an amalgamation across the different dynasties and retellings of the story. There are definitely other versions, and I'll touch on a couple of the changes and stuff at the end, but not all of them, of course, because there are so many versions of this story. So if you know this story, may be familiar with a different version from me. Just be aware, there are lots of different versions. This is just one of them. But I'm excited. I want to tell you guys this story, so I'm going to tell you right now. So this story takes place, as all of my stories do, in the way, way long ago. And it actually takes place a little bit before the way, way long ago. So the way longer ago, because there was just a white snake hanging out, doing its thing, living in the mountains, sometimes traveling closer to the towns, doing snake stuff. It was doing snake business, okay? And one day it happened to sort of cross the paths of the humans in the village, and when one of the humans in the village saw it, they tried to stomp the snake to death because they were scared of snakes, and people do people things. And they ended up being stopped by a person who will later on become relevant. I don't want to spoil the story for you guys, but somebody stopped this person from stomping this snake to death, and the snake was so moved by this act of kindness from another human that they decided to spend their time living an ascetic, not aesthetic, lifestyle as a Taoist. So, the white snake ventured back into the mountains, where it ended up meeting a green snake, and the green snake was like a little bit feisty, a little bit snappy, a little bit sarcastic, but they got along really well, and the white snake decided that she was going to adopt the green snake as her sister. So they were now sisters forevermore, and they spent 1,000 years on Mount Ame? I told you I'm going to butcher them, but it's a mountain in the Sichuan province. And they spent 1,000 years studying like Taoist traditions and basically mastering like the Tao. And after 1,000 years, they managed to gain the magical ability to transform themselves into beautiful human maidens. And once they transformed, they took proper names outside of white snake and green snake. And so the white snake became Bai Suzhen, which is basically like white, pure, loyal. It's a sort of a complex translation. And then the green snake became Zhao King, or Zhao Qing, which means little green, because she was the little sister. And magically, they found themselves now beautiful human women with proper human names. But beside the West Lake in Zhejiang province. And it's one of the most beautiful places in all of the world. You can actually look it up. It's a real place online. It's a real place in life. You can look it up online. But they found themselves there, and so they decided to enjoy the scenery, take a walk, and sort of enjoy everything. And they found themselves at the famous broken bridge when it started to rain. And, of course, they're human women, so they are bothered by the rain and their beautiful clothes. So they decide to hide underneath a willow tree to, seek shelter from the rain. And as they're hanging out there, a young but kind of naive dude named Zhu Jian happened to walk by. He was an herbalist who lived in the village nearby, and he had an umbrella. He had literally just got done being like a good, pious family member and sweeping the graves of his family. So he was coming away from that. He saw these two beautiful women underneath the tree, and he was like, hey, do you want to use my umbrella? And let me help you get a boat so that you can cross the lake and get home to wherever the heck it is you live. I don't know why he thought that they lived across the lake. He just assumed. But they take his umbrella, and as soon as she gets handed the umbrella, Bai Suzhen decides that she's madly in love with him. She's like, this guy is so sweet, he's so nice, I absolutely love him. And so she's like, well, why don't you come to our place tomorrow to pick up the umbrella since you're being so nice to let us borrow the umbrella? And he's like, yeah, I'll do that, no problem. So she tells him where they live. They apparently have a house. This is magic, don't look too deep into it. And so they take the boat, they go across the lake, and then they go home. And the next day, Shu shows up to pick up his umbrella. And they meet a couple more times. So she gives him back the umbrella. They chat. Everything is really nice. They're having a good time. They get along. And he comes back to see Bai again. And after a couple of these little meetings, she's like, hey, do you want to get married? And Shu was like ecstatic, you guys, because Bai Suzhen is gorgeous. She's drop dead beautiful, and she's prettier than any girl in his village, but also he's just a poor herbalist who doesn't really have like a lot of prospects, and so like marrying this beautiful woman was already like way beyond anything he would have expected or anticipated for himself. So he immediately agrees on the spot. He's like, yes, I absolutely will marry you. I would be a fool not to marry you. And so Xiaoqing, little sister, decides that they should get married. They should get married beneath heaven and earth. They should show their worship and be joined immediately on the spot in marriage. So Bai Suzhen and Shu are then married, and they move in together and open up their own apothecary. So now, with the help of Bai Suzhen, Shu is able to run a fairly successful apothecary, because it turns out that Bai Suzhen is really good at mixing medicine. It's a skill that she has. And so she helps him thrive in business. And they end up not just becoming moderately to fairly well off, thanks to her assistance in this apothecary, but they're also able to help out the poor, and they're able to help out in times of plague and all sorts of things. And there's even a point where Shu's former boss at the apothecary that he worked at before he opened up his own business, sells him some bad rotten medicine, bad rotten herbs for medicine, and a plague breaks out and people need this medicine, but like all they have are rotten herbs. So however she does it, Bai Suzhen manages to turn this like rotten medicine into something that can actually be used. So she whips a concoction that ends up curing all the people of the plague. They're able to give it out, and then they're even able to sell it back to that rotten guy, his former boss, who sold him the bad herbs to begin with, because he needed it. His family caught the plague too. So they end up curing everybody and managing to sort of get themselves out of this hairy situation. And everything's going great. They're having a good time. The problem is that up on the Golden Mountain Monastery, in the town of Zhenjing, there was a priest named Fa Hai. And he knew immediately, hearing all this news about this apothecary and this magical medicine mixer named Bai Suzhen, that Bai Suzhen was some kind of demon. And upon seeing her, he knew that she was a snake demon. And he knows that snake demons are big trouble, and he decides that he's going to go tell Shu that his wife is a snake demon. And there's lots of debate here on whether or not he's doing this because he thinks it's the right thing, or if he feels morally righteous, and so therefore decides that he needs to intervene because he's the authority on the things that are right, or if it's just like a power grab, and he's a little bit jealous that this demon is doing so well for herself and, you know, getting so much like praise from all the people around her. We don't really know what his motivations are, but he takes it really personal that Bai Suzhen is out there living her unbothered, glamorous life. And so when he tells Shu that, hey, your wife is a demon, she's a snake demon, she was like, no, I don't believe you. Because why would he? She's a beautiful woman who's done nothing but bring him prosperity and happiness. And he's like, no, if you don't believe me, on the day of the Lantern Festival, give your wine, your wine, oh my gosh, words are really hard. Give your wife some wine and see what happens. So he's like, I don't want to, like, get my wife drunk for no reason. And he's like, no, I promise you, if she's not a snake demon, the wine will just be like a great aphrodisiac and you guys will have a great night together. So she was like, okay, well, this can't go wrong because my wife is not a snake demon. So on the night of the Lantern Festival, he does give Bai Suzhen some wine. She finishes her cup, and then she's like, oh my god, I'm so sick. And she ends up running off to the bedroom. She's like, I'm done for the night. I'm calling it a night. And Shu feels so bad that his wife got so sick from this wine that he whips up a little medicine to give to her. And when he goes into their bedroom and pulls back the curtains on their bed, he sees a giant white snake in his bed. And this terrifies him so much that he falls down dead on the spot. He dies. So in the morning, when Bai Suzhen wakes up, recovered from the illness that the wine gave her, she sees that her husband, the man that she loves, is lying dead on the floor, and he's dead because she was a giant snake. And now she feels really bad about it. And she goes to find her sister, shouting, and she's like, we have to go find the herbs that we need to bring him back to life. And what I could find was that the herb that they're talking about is the Lingxi herb, which turns out to just be reishi mushrooms, which is very interesting because reishi mushrooms are very good for you. But this was the herb that she needed to find, and it's being guarded by the immortal of the South Pole. And so they have to take this special trip. So Bai Suzhen gets on a cloud, and she rides this into the heavens to go visit the immortal's garden where they're keeping this herb. And she has to do battle with the guardians who are there, and she manages to defeat one of the guardians, but the other guardian and her sort of get caught up in this situation where she has to disguise herself as a monk in order to sneak past him and be like, oh, I'm just here to invite the immortal to like a feast of immortals. And he's like, cool, I was looking for a white snake lady, but you're clearly not it, person who is disguised as a monk who just, you know, showed up after my like partner got beat in a battle. No questions to ask. So she manages to steal the mushroom, but then the guardian's like, hey, wait a minute, I know what's going on here. So he chases her, and then she has to put the mushroom underneath her tongue to keep it from like getting lost while she's fleeing from this other guardian. And when she does that, like the second she puts it in her mouth, they both turn back into their animal form. So he turns back into a crane and she turns back into a snake, at which point the guardian of the South Pole, the immortal, shows up and is like, what are you doing? Why are you stealing from me? So she tells him the whole story. She's like, here's what's happening. I need to bring my husband back. Even if he doesn't want to be with me anymore, like, I have to do the right thing. I have to bring him back. And so the immortal's like, oh, you could have just asked, and sends her on her way. So she goes back to Earth, and she gives Shu the medicine, and it does actually bring him back to life. He comes back to life, and he's a little bit wary of, like, the state of things, of the fact that she's a reptile, and she's like, I promise you, all I want to do is like love and be with you and cherish you forever. And he's like, okay, well, I'm grateful that you brought me back, but this is a little bit weird. And once Fahai realizes that not only is Bai Suzhen still kicking it in the village, but she managed to continue to maintain her marriage to Shu, he's like, all right, Shu, you and I gotta have a talk. So Shu goes to talk to him, and he's like, hey, everything's okay. Like, I don't think she's as bad as you say. We had a little oopsie, but she brought me back, and it's fine, and I've been living with her since, and everything's going really well. And Fahai is like, no, actually, I'm kidnapping you. And he's like, say that again? And he's like, I'm kidnapping you. I'm taking you to my monastery, and I'm going to force you to be under protective custody because clearly you're too stupid to realize that you're married to a demon. And so he does that. He kidnaps Shu. And by the evening, Bai Suzhen is like, where's my husband? And she's a little bit sad because, one, she lost her husband. But two, she wanted to tell him that she was with child. but she can't because he's gone. So at this point, Bai Suzhen goes to Green Snake, to Zhao Qing, and she's like, hey, we gotta figure out what happened to my husband. He's missing. And Zhao Qing is like, give this up. Go find, like, another immortal or another, like, he-snake that you can settle down with. We're gonna have a good time. It's gonna be so much easier than trying to deal with this mortal man. You're immortal. Just do the thing with an immortal. Like, look, give this up. Give up the goat. But Bai Suzhen's like, no, I'm with child. I want my child to have their father. We need to find him. So Zhao Qing is like, okay, all right, I'll go with you. But, like, honestly, it'd just be so much easier if you would find somebody else to love. Like, so much easier. And Bai Suzhen's like, I don't want to hear it. We're going to go find my husband. So they end up going to the monastery because, of course, who else is the culprit? It's Fahai. And when they get there, they're like, hey, pretty please, will you give us back Shu? And he's like, no, I won't. I'm keeping him forever because, yeah, you're a demon and you're icky and I don't like you. So they're like, hey, we're really trying to be nice and, like, find common ground with you here. We're not trying to hurt people. We're just trying to live peaceful lives. We're good snakes. And, you know, that's her husband. And they're happy together. And at this point, she was like, I actually am really happy with my snake wife. I really would love to get back there. And Fahai is like, shut up, you're stupid. You don't know what you want. She's an evil demon. You can't possibly be together. And at this point, Bai Suzhen is like, okay, we tried talking. Now I'm going to get serious because, like, this is a little bit silly. You're stealing my husband from me. So she removes her hairpin, which turns into a giant command flag. And she waves this flag around. And out of the sea come, like, crab and shrimp soldiers. And they rush the monastery. So if you can imagine giant crab and shrimp soldiers rising out of the sea and coming in a wave to attack this monastery, it's bananas, but this is what happens. But unfortunately, when this happens, when all these crabs and shrimp come rising up out of the ocean, the water level also rises, which causes a huge flood, which of course threatens the monastery. But also, this is the first time that Bai Suzhen's actions have caused harm to, like, the human population, because this flood doesn't just affect the monastery, it affects the surrounding villages and the people there. So some people end up losing their lives or having their lives, like, totally derailed by this flood. And Bai Suzhen's heart is filled with lots of grief and remorse because she doesn't want to hurt people. She's never hurt people, and this is the first time. And because of this, she actually loses some of her favor from the gods who were protecting her for being so virtuous, because she had lived for 1,000 years practicing the way of the Tao and being a very virtuous snake. And now she's hurt people, so they're like, drop her, cut her, block her. We don't like her anymore. So she loses the favor of the gods, and the priest, who's, like, a little bit unfazed, even though there's a huge flood coming at him, all he does is remove his robe, which is holy, and cast it at the waters that are coming towards the monastery. It becomes a giant dam, which holds back the floods. So the snakes are defeated, and they withdraw, and they end up going back to the broken bridge where all of this had started, where they had first met Shu. And while all this commotion is happening, Shu, for the first time in this entire story, decides to take some action and not be a naive, affable kind of dude who's just going with the flow and experiencing things as they happen. He decides to run away. He's like, hey, the monk is distracted, Fahai is busy, I think I'm going to take off. So Shu ends up escaping the monastery, and he knows that he needs to re-meet Bai at the willow tree. So he ends up going there, and while they're there, she tells him, like, okay, it's true. I am a snake demon, but I am madly in love with you. And, I'm with child. I have your child. And she was like, hey, I love you despite the fact that you are a snake demon. And I'm really excited that we're having a son together. And so together, they have forgiven each other for the misunderstanding and the lack of communication and are, like, happy to move on. Unfortunately, though, Zhao Qing was like, you know what? You're a wimp. You're not good enough for my sister Bai, and I have issues with that. So she takes her sword out, because she's a very fiery person who always carries a sword, and she whips her sword out, and she threatens Shu, and she's like, hey, I am going to cut off your head, because you are more trouble than you're worth. You're a pathetic excuse of a man, and I just don't like how meek and mild you are. You've caused all these problems for us. And Shu, in typical fashion, does not defend himself. He actually just drops to the ground and is like, I surrender. And Bai ends up being really exasperated with this whole situation because her husband is a wimp, and that is frustrating for her too. She's not frustrated by the lack of backbone that her husband has. She loves him anyways, but she's also like, oh, my sister, okay. So she ends up just talking her sister down and being like, hey, I know you're mad, I know this has been a lot of problems for us, but I do love this man, and I would really like it if you stopped threatening him. So Zhao Qing is like, okay, fine, but one more fuck up from this guy, one more time, and chop, I'm gonna chop his head off. So they all end up moving back in together and waiting for the little baby boy to be born, because it is going to be a boy. So Bai ends up finally giving birth to their son, and this entire time, you might be like, I wonder what Fa Hai did after they left the monastery and stopped the flood and all that stuff happened. Did he just wait patiently for her son to be born? Yes, he did. But he was not patient in waiting. He was just waiting, stewing in anger the entire time, because he can't let this go. He will not let the idea that this man is married to a snake demon just drop, even though they're perfectly happy, and she's never done anything unless provoked to harm people. He just can't let it go. So he decides to meet Shu out on the street. Well, Shu goes to market, and he's like, hey, congratulations on your baby. Sorry about that whole misunderstanding. I know things got a little bit hairy there. I was just worried about your safety. And to show that there's no hard feelings and that I'm genuine in my apology, here is this, like, bronze bowl. It's a blessings bowl. It'll protect your son. And Shu is, like, aware that Bai has lost her heavenly favor, so he's like, oh yeah, like, protection for my son is actually a pretty good idea since my wife doesn't have her magical heavenly favor, and yeah, I'll definitely take this blessing bowl. Thank you so much, sir. An apology accepted. So he goes home and he goes to show Bai this bowl. Turns out this bowl is not just like a regular bowl. It's magical. And as soon as he shows it to Bai, it hits her on the head and she gets sucked up into the bowl, at which point Fa Hai shows up, picks up the bowl, and he's like, yeah, I'll be taking this. Goodbye. And he ends up taking it out to this pagoda and imprisoning her beneath the pagoda, and Xiao Qing comes out there to stop him, and she goes to fight the monk. She defeats the monk, but she's unable to free Bai from her prison underneath this pagoda of Thunder Peak is what it's called in English. I don't know what it's called in Chinese and Mandarin. But she's unable to free Bai from this pavilion, so she's, like, destitute. Her sister has been lost. She's mad at humanity because humanity did this to her sister. So she ends up going back to the mountains to sort of chill a little bit and see if there's another way that she can free her sister. And during this time, Shu manages to raise their son, whose name I have forgotten and do not have in my notes for some reason, but he ends up becoming a great scholar, and not just like a regular scholar, but like one of the greatest scholars of all time, to the point where he gains some heavenly favor, and he gets bestowed all these gifts upon him, so he decides that he's going to honor his mother and the heavens for giving him all these gifts for being such a cool guy. So he goes to the pagoda that he knows his mother is trapped at and leaves an offering on the trees there for his mother and for, you know, all the heavenly representatives who have shown him support. And what ends up happening is when he leaves this virtuous, non-selfish gift at this pavilion, or the pagoda, the ground opens up and Bai Suzhen is, like, she emerges and she's able to be reunited with her son and her husband, and there's a couple of differing opinions on what happens at the end, but it's agreed upon that they live happily ever after. And that's the end of the story. It's a little bit crazy, and I did not mention, but I forgot to mention, even though I set up the mention, was that the reason that Bai Suzhen and Shu had such a connection was that he was actually the reincarnated version of the person who saved her when she was just a snake from being stomped on by the other person in the village. that was the beginning of the story. I forgot to put it into my thread here, but that's what happened. Was he was reincarnated, so he was the nice guy who saved her then. She recognized him as being the reincarnated soul of the person who saved her the first time, so she felt a lot more of a kinship and an attraction towards him because he was her savior, essentially, at one point, and was the person who put her on the path of Taoism and trying to live a good and happy life. And as of today, there's actually a lot of movies and TV shows and all sorts of stuff about Bai Suzhen, about White Snake. There's a movie featuring Jet Li, which is where I first saw this story. There is a movie on Netflix called Green Snake, which actually features the sister, Xiao Qing, and her journey trying to save her sister from this whole event. And it's actually really good. I would recommend both. Both are really good versions of the story, but I do like in Green Snake that you get to see the perspective from her sister's side. That's something that I don't see very often, but there's actually dozens and dozens of movies and things about White Snake. So if you have not seen it yet, it's going to be very easy to find the media on if you're interested in doing that, and I would recommend it. It's just a really good story. It's generally a very wholesome story about a snake who's just trying to do the good thing and does good things and has a romance, a love story with this mortal man. And now there's a couple of different versions of this story. Like I said, there's versions where the monk is actually downright evil, and he's the one that started the plague, and so the whole reason Bai Suzhen ends up on his radar is because she cured the plague, and he's like, how am I supposed to make money and be successful curing the plague for other people if they're all going to this lady who's a snake? And yeah, that's a version, and I thought that was a little bit dastardly. I think I kind of like the perspective that he's just a holy person who might be on a bit of a righteous crusade and not really looking at things with perspectives and not considering all the parties involved and how their feelings are on it, because he knows inherently demon bad, Buddhist monk good kind of thing. There's not a lot of different versions of Bai in the story, except that one of the earliest versions from the Tang Dynasty actually does depict her as a seductress of men and a demonic sort of character, which is really different than all the versions that came after, which is very interesting. So I don't know if she just got a better PR campaign or what, but for a while she was evil demon snake lady, and Fahai was totally justified in trying to get rid of her because she was corrupt. But then at some point, the story changed, and everyone decided that Bai was actually very virtuous and noble, and that's continued to this day. There's actually a center of worship where she's revered as Madam White Snake, and treated as a goddess, and there's actually a temple to her worship and stuff like that that exists now currently as we're speaking. That's a real thing that's happened, and that's so cool for something that started out as a folktale to sort of grown in such a way to have its own sort of religion centered around it, which is really cool. There are versions where they do a lot more battle. There's a lot of fighting and all sorts of things like that, and there's a lot of different versions. Honestly, if you like the story that I told you today, I would recommend just going to give it a look and checking it out to see which versions you like the best, because there's so many. There's comic books, there's all sorts of stuff. And like I said, it is one of the great 4 folktales from China, and they're all very fascinating, so if you get the chance to look into them. This is not my favorite of the Chinese mythologies or folktales. My favorite would probably be the story of Sun Wukong and the Monkey King, which is a very long story, so I have been debating doing it on this channel, but it's very, very long, so it would have to be multiple parts in order to do, and I don't know if there's enough interest in the story of Sun Wukong. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I think I have one more snake story to tell in honor of our Lunar New Year. But this was the pinnacle story I wanted to tell. This was the reason I was like, I'm going to do snake stories, was I wanted to tell you guys the story of White Snake. And I hope that you enjoyed it. I don't do a lot of stories from China, and I should, because there's lots of cool stuff there. I just, it's hard to do all the stories in the world all at once. And I try to just, touch every base I possibly can. And yeah, I guess that's going to be it for me, guys, because I'm just going to start rambling. I have heard your request to keep Storycraft going. I am trying to find a way to make that organically work. I have not figured it out yet, so open to suggestions. It does take a lot of work to put these episodes together, and they keep me from doing other things, which is why I wanted to cut it off at 100. But, you guys really like it, and I want to keep doing stuff that you guys really like. So I have to figure out the best way to do that. And I don't necessarily want to, like, paywall it. But I can say that the motivation to continue doing it would be improved by, like, making it like a YouTube member thing or a Patreon thing that then maybe gets a later release onto YouTube. So yeah, I don't know. I have to think about what I'm going to do, because we are coming to the end of it, and I don't want to, like, just drop off and then not tell you guys what the plan is or anything like that. So I'll let you know as things go. But as per usual, let me know what you think of the story in the comments below. And yeah, anything else you want to tell me, any requests you want to make for stories you want to hear, I would love to hear them before Storycraft wraps up, for at least the version of it as it exists now. And that's going to be it for me, you guys. I will catch you all on the next one. I appreciate your faces so much. Thank you for being here with me. And until next time, guys, happy crafting. Bye!